Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Today's Friday, May 24th, 2019. We're continuing our fiscal year 2020 budget review. Today we are featuring our coroner, Dr. Keene. Also joining us is our clerk, Jim Brannon. Attending our commissioners, Duncan Brooks and Filios. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Also helping to lead our discussion is Finance Director Dina Darrow. And so off we go. Fiscal year 2020 budget review, general discussion. Dr. Keene, would you like to lead us, or Dina, who's first?
Well, I'll be happy to get started.
Okay.
Just for the new commissioners, that a little bit of history of what we've done in the coroner's office before is that when I was elected in 2015, 4 years ago, I had to eat some crow because I assessed the office and where we were and where things were going, and we needed to have a pathology lab. And so I brought that forth every year for the last 5 years. Initially, when the new jail was going in, I tried to piggyback onto that, as I thought putting a cinder block wall up and extending the roof would give us, 3,000 square feet of space for a small amount of money. And that just kind of complicated things, and so that was nixed and told to put it in the budget. And so then we went forward with Dale Hickman of H2A Architects, looking for a way to get a lab up and going, as well as office space, because office space in the county is significantly short. At that time, Commissioner Eberlein discussed the work release pod that was available. They were going to remodel one for evidence, which has been accomplished, and that would be an area where a lab and office space could be remodeled and brought forward. And each year I brought it forward, and we've had design money in the budget that got cut, and we forgot about it, and then it got sent to design and remodel, and it's been cut, and that's kind of where we're at this point in time. But I do my due diligence every year. I start out in January working on the budget, what it's going to be, talking to the people, the vendors that I have, working with them, seeing what's going to happen, to try and anticipate things for the budget year so that I can put it into the budget, which is where we have always wanted it to be. My budget is 0.4% of the county budget, and if the lab at $545,000 is approved, it'll take my budget up to 0.8 of the county budget, which is a small amount, but yet it's still a significant increase from last year, and I know that things are tight. So what I'd like to do is that I talked to the law enforcement people, and I gave you the email letters from them, and I was asked to bring hard copies for the record so that they can be put in as law enforcement gives support for the position of having the lab and those kind of things. And then some of my asks, I've been working with some of my vendors, and I also emailed you those letters from 2 of the funeral homes, giving their perspective as to what's going on. And there was a wrinkle given to me last night by hand delivery in my office, and I would like to...
That's the contractor issue, Dr. Keene?
Yes.
Okay.
We have been given a 30-day withdrawal notice from one of the funeral homes. So that means we have no, that's for the record, and this is for you guys, that we have no transportation, body storage, or anything else from them furthermore from this point. Sorry. So that brings us to the budget, and it's going to have some significant wrinkles from where we are and to where we would like to be. Right now, we're totally dependent on the funeral homes for transportation from the decedent's home to the funeral home, from the funeral home to Spokane Medical Examiner, return, and final disposition. I don't have 2 full-time deputies to do that. I don't have a vehicle to do that. We don't have any coolers to store them. Now, since this happened last night, I have not had a chance to have a face-to-face meeting with the other two funeral homes to see what their thoughts are about picking up the slack.
Okay.
And so that is concerning because we don't have any fallback position.
Keep going.
Once I meet with them and discuss what they expect and if they're gonna pick up the slack or if they also are going to exercise their 30-day out clause, we can have some catastrophic situations.
Okay.
Best case scenario is that they say, yes, you know, we're gonna, with the increased money that I've put forth in my budget, that they'll take that, utilize that, and continue to give the county good service, which they have. That's the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is that they drop out completely, and in 60 days, we have to have full body storage, full transportation, van, 2 new employees to accomplish the thing that we've depended on these other individuals for. We have no place to store bodies. I mean, I can get a vendor to send me portable coolers, and I have no room in the elections building to put coolers, and they're not secure either. You know, we could put a lock on admin A downstairs and put a guard down there and put plastic on the carpet. But I don't think that's an ideal situation.
So what brought, well, because we do need to get on with the budget, but just briefly, what brought this about? The whole issue of our payment for the indigent services, is that it?
I was not told the reason for other than in the letter.
Other than in the letter?
Right. They, and I have communicated with them all several times since January, and I indicated to them that I was going to put increased reimbursement for their costs into my budget, and I was presenting my budget today, so they all knew that. But
how big is the issue? I mean, how many of these situations do we encounter on an annual basis?
I'm not sure what the
where
question.
we have, you know, indigency, where they expect us to pick up the tab.
This is something separate. This is the coroner's.
Yeah, this is totally
rights.
separate because we are responsible in the coroner's office for every unattended death in the county. And so those people that are unattended, they call the funeral home on call to come out to wherever the decedent passed, transfer them back to the home, funeral home, and then if the patient wants a different funeral home to make services, then that's accomplished amongst the group. So that happens probably 3 to 4 times a week.
When you say unattended,
By statute, that is, there is no physician, provider, nurse practitioner in attendance during the last illness.
That also requires fatality car crashes, suicides, all of the things.
okay, so you're right, okay, so this is an entirely different issue.
Yes.
And the reason that I'm asking is I remember the issue of indigency coming before us. I'm going back to the prior board, because this is before their time. I don't remember necessarily the issue that you're describing coming before us from the funeral, you know, from the funeral.
Right,
home,
as you
from the funeral
know,
homes, thank you.
as you know, when I first was sworn in, the funeral homes got $0 for their transportation, storage, and all of their work. In years prior to that, last 4 years, they got about $1,000 a month. Halfway through my term, realizing the predicament they were in, I negotiated up to $1,500 compensation per month for being on call. That's 24/7. They work 8 hours a day, they're at home, they have to get out of their place and come to the decedent's death and then take them and take care of them. I mean, that's what they do. They do an excellent job at it.
It's very easy for us to triple their workload that month, easily.
Okay.
And they just don't have the staff, they don't have the time, they don't have the budget to support our needs as well.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's move on with the budget and we can come back to this.
Okay,
Yeah, let's proceed, because I want to stick to the agenda.
sure, this is all part of
Right,
my
that was
budget.
part of it, I get it.
So as a coroner, these are the trends and cost drivers that we have going forward and in the past. I've updated all of the numbers so that they are reflected from last year's numbers, because this is a very similar presentation. Our cost growth is greater than expected. Last year, we handled 1,542 cases. We had another second highest month last month when we were at 157 cases. There's been 15 suicides this year. Last year, we were high at 42. So everything is going up. And as we've discussed, Kootenai County is the fastest growing county outside of Ada County. And the demographics are all older people who, we have a lot of young people who have accidental deaths, but we have a lot of natural deaths from the higher demographics. The services that were once complimentary are now requiring payment, and now we are increasing by a third, according to this letter, services to the other two people who are already overwhelmed. We have to isolate those cost drivers, project the trends, which we're trying to do, and discuss alternatives, and that's why I bring forward this letter, is what alternatives do we have? The autopsy services are still in Spokane. They are on a different calendar year, but I've done my due diligence every year, and I call them and I say, you know, last year you gave us a 17% increase in cost. Are you anticipating any cost this year? And they always tell me, no. But they don't start their budget cycle until September, because they're on a calendar year. So by the time ours is fixed, they start looking at their numbers and say, oh, we gotta increase prices. And so that's why last January we got that 17% increase.
Do you know, I'm sorry, do you know if Spokane, is it paying for itself? I mean, are they keeping even, or they, do they have?
We're a profit center for them,
Absolutely.
because we contribute anywhere from $110,000 to $130,000 to their costs. So I have no idea what their numbers are as far as Spokane County citizens' contribution through taxes.
Okay.
But we're a profit center.
I know, but it still takes money to run it, you know.
And that's why I don't have access to that part of their
Okay.
budget. So all I can do is tell you where we're at. Our lab fees that we send off to the national lab, where we get the opiates, and after we go over our $2,900, which we're at now, we will be then submitting those invoices for grant reimbursement, so there is a little bit of revenue coming in there. The radiology services, that whatever the pathologists require, we pay for that. They choose the labs that they want to use, they choose the DNA studies, they choose the infant inborn errors of metabolism tests. We have to pay for all of those kind of things. And then the transportation, which we're just covering now, and then of course there's the overtime for my people as they're getting busier and busier. My chief deputy is the only one that gets overtime. She's a full-time person with benefits. The other people are part-time, get no benefits, get no comp time, get no overtime.
Except we just changed that for one of them, right?
Yes,
They just went to-
Joanne is
did.
now permanent, part-time, and we increased her hours from 19.5 to 25.
Right.
But she still doesn't get any benefits, still doesn't get overtime. So if she works on her on-call work, if she works 25 to 30 hours, that means in the office,
I'm the only one there.
we can't get any more hours out of her.
Okay.
And so those are the costs that my office is seeing, and with the increased numbers, that's kind of where we're at. This is comparison. Last year, the commissioners wanted to see comparison with the other counties in the state. Ada County, of course, is the busiest out of Boise, Canyon County, Kootenai, Bonneville, and Twin Falls. Now in Ada County, you'll see that their full-time equivalent autopsy ratio and their per capita cost is quite a bit higher. That's because I'm comparing apples to apples. So we do only complete autopsies, full complete autopsies. That's all we do, because that's all the pathologists in Spokane will allow us to do. In Ada County, they will also do partial autopsies, they'll do head only, they'll do external exams only. And so they have, I think, 427 all inclusive of that, and that brings their per capita cast down to about 215, I believe, for all of those things. Twin Falls has a pathology lab, but Ada County several years ago poached their pathologist and they haven't been able to replace it. So they have to send all of their stuff to Ada County.
So once, if this were to be approved and once the lab was up and running, you'd have to hire a pathologist?
Well, that is, in the long term, that's probably a long-term goal, 5 to 10 years. But in the short term, and I've been to numerous other facilities in the region, Franklin-Benton County, which is one of the Tri-Cities are in Washington, they contract with a pathologist out of Seattle to come down to do their autopsies, and they do about 50 to 55 a year between the two counties. And he comes down and they have a facility that's all set up, and so it's a contract type deal. There's national organizations that will do contract autopsies. And the question that nobody asks of Spokane is what's their contingency plan? And if you want to know what the contingency plan is, you have to go over and talk to the worker bees. And I was there last month talking to the worker bees because I wanted to pick up some tissue that had to be sent in to a lab out in Connecticut. And the worker bees say, well, why don't you guys have a building? Why don't you have a lab? You're the next biggest place around here and you should have one. I said, well, in an ideal world, that would be fine. And in an ideal world, what would happen is that the pathologist would create an LLC, have a partnership, bring in a mentor to the Spokane area, and then we could contract with the independent person to come over and do our 50 or 60 autopsies, one a week on Ascension. And they said, well, that requires the doctors to work. They're talking about retirement, both of them. And I said, well, what's Spokane County's contingency? There isn't one. They're building a 30,000 square foot building, and they don't have a pathologist track of people coming in to run it.
How much do the contracts run, do you know?
That's on an individual basis with the pathologist. I believe in a mass fatality situation, if we are 20 decedents and less, we have agreements with the pathologists, not Spokane people, but from outside pathologists come in and do a complete autopsy for $1,500 per fatality. In the private world, they're between $4,000 and $6,000. That's what we tell the patients, that when they don't meet criteria for me to do an autopsy, I say, this is a list of pathologists that you can use for an autopsy, and you should look at $4,000 to $6,000 is what it's going to cost you. We get by with all of the radiology, lab, room rental, transcription services, doctor's fees for about $3,000 per autopsy.
Okay, so over the course of a year, that would be $150,000.
Right.
And what would it cost you to employ pathologists full-time? Probably at least that.
No, you're probably
Plus,
running
no.
225 to 250.
That's what I'm
Yes.
thinking.
A
Yes,
full-time
yes, I
pathologist.
said at least, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Ada County pays, that's what Missoula pays.
Right.
And that's also keeping the money in our own state. Because now we're shipping that money to Washington.
We're shipping that money to Washington, that's right.
So,
And
those are
Washington is charging us what? And I know we've been over this time.
about
but-
$3,000, altogether it's about $3,000.
Okay, so it's not quite a wash, but okay.
Right. And so this is the trends of our current operation, and you can see in 2019 the red line is where we are today. We have been fortunate that we have not had a significant number of autopsies to perform. We are at 62% of the budget that I ran last night, and my total budget spending is about 47%, which is good because the commissioners have tasked me with saving the money to pay for Joanne's extra hours, which I'm fully willing to do, and I believe it will come through without having extra money coming from the commissioners. And these are kind of forecasts based on the trends of what we're doing. If you look at 2023, an increased C budget, that is the automobile replacement type deal. We have a vehicle, and that would be at the time it would be replaced, and so that's what the green line is in there for. So we can reduce outsourced services, reduce labor, and create new revenue streams. And what the lab would do would create revenue streams, small but still. Outside autopsies could be done there, and we could charge a fee for that.
Question, speaking of that, Shoshone, Donner, and Boundary, does Spokane perform theirs?
Yes,
Would you pick that up?
I would offer it, but it's up to the county coroner in each jurisdiction to make the same MOU as they want.
Yeah, it's their choice, right?
It's their choice. And that's why I was thinking about an LLC with Dr. Akins, Dr. Howard, and perhaps a new forensic pathologist, because they are known quantities. They are good forensic pathologists. They do a very good job. And if they had an LLC and they were here for part of that time and got paid more of what they, I have no idea how much they get of the fee that we're charged. You know, that's something that Spokane County, and they have, I don't know what their agreement is. So that would work in our favor to bring in outside autopsies and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
There's tissue donation. Everybody has or may have on their driver's license where they can donate organs in the event of their crash. And right now, Kootenai Health is so busy that it is difficult for the tissue teams to come in and have a clean room. It doesn't have to be a sterile operating room. It just has to be a clean room to do tissue. And if anybody's offended, this is what I do all the time. So we're talking about
No, go ahead.
eyes, skin, long bones, tendons, ligaments. And that doesn't include somebody who has a head injury.
You're into body parts. is what you're
Exactly.
saying.
That's tissue donation. And that doesn't include the people that have a head injury and are brain dead and have organ donation for live organ donation.
Okay.
So those are potential revenue streams.
And I will just add, I'll just speak to the numbers here. So the green bars at the top represent a ramp up in 2020, those design fees, and then 2021, 2022 would be the construction of the lab, and then 2023 is that vehicle replacement. So in the lower chart, we're seeing increased lab revenue. Obviously is not covering expenses, but that cost curve with the red line does get bent downward because now there's a revenue stream where there wasn't, and we're doing things in-house. So yes, greater cost, but over time, that cost curve goes down. And like Dr. Keene said, there are other revenue streams besides. So the next slide kind of gives a general game plan.
And this is based on what the last board wanted. They wanted it split out into design and then building costs over the next 2 years, which you could do it all in one. That's what I proposed to do in my budget, but obviously the budget is what you get to set.
Can you go back to the prior slide, Gina, please? So the bottom one, forecasted revenue. I presume that's the neighboring counties?
Yes.
And the tissue harvest procedures that Dr. Keene
Okay.
described.
And is that, what is it based on? Is it based on doing their entire complement of autopsies?
Yes.
Okay. So you have an idea what their volume is, I presume,
For all of the other 6 counties, it's about 44.
per year?
Yeah.
Okay. And we would be charging how much?
Well, that's to be determined, but, you know.
But there's some figure that's assumed in the analysis, right?
But I don't know what that, I think that was probably
What'd you figure?
$3,000, because that's about.
Yeah, I
what
mean, we
charge.
just did a very rough estimate, just a very general estimate. The forecast is fairly loose, but what we're trying to do is show that over time, things would ramp up. And just depending upon marketing efforts, the last time I looked at Spokane's revenue to expenses, their medical examiner does provide a report online. The last time I looked, they hadn't updated it, but they do 12 outside counties besides Spokane County. And, you know, they don't cover their costs, but they do have a lot of outside work that comes in. So it sounds to me like there's opportunity for more revenues to come in from outside sources because the local area provider has plenty of outside sources. So I don't know if they do tissue harvest or if that's something that would be new. There might be other areas where revenue could be derived depending upon what service would be available. It would depend on how the facility was built and what it was able to do. So this is just a very loose forecast based on just key drivers.
When you did some prior analysis, you know, going back a year or so.
Yeah.
And you'll have to refresh my memory, but I thought what it netted was that it didn't really make sense for us to go down this road.
Well, it's never gonna, the lab will never cover its own costs.
Right.
In the next slide, I actually updated the revenue streams.
Okay, thanks.
So we can pay for the lab over the course of time, but the ongoing operations.
Well, sure.
The goal would be to manage costs overall and bend that cost curve down, but the cost will always exceed revenues.
And somewhere in here, you factored the cost of a pathologist?
A contract pathologist, yes.
Okay. That's the private autopsy services, I
Yes.
presume, okay.
And again, just a forecast, just based on some, you know, dartboard numbers.
Spokane is also partnering with the college over there and their medical
WSU.
students. Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if there's an option, but to partner with our college and go through grant money and things like that for their nursing program, their law enforcement program, and things of that nature. If there's grant money to be had there to partner with them, I don't know. But we have a college, we have a law enforcement program, we have a medical program.
So, you know, so our ongoing okay, so estimated income, I'm just gonna look at, let's go look at 2027. You're looking at estimated potential revenue of 147,000. The incremental cost, this is obviously well and above the startup, right?
Right, that's the disposable consumables that you have ongoing all the time as far as, you know, with the lab, whether it's tissue slides and cleaning fluids and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. So there are extra costs associated with running a lab besides the regular coroner's costs.
So you're looking at is it fair to say a break even at year 5.4?
To pay for the lab, yes.
To pay for the lab, thank you.
Yes, this is to pay for the lab.
Right. Okay, which is not included in the analysis up above.
No.
That's just essentially ongoing recurring revenue. Okay.
Right, which would help offset the coroner's total costs,
Mm-hmm.
but not completely cover those total costs.
Okay. Thoughts?
No, I mean, you talked about, I don't like the all or nothing approach, but especially this year, what was the, she said that they had proposed a two-stage
Right.
implementation.
The previous commissioners wanted to see it split out, so designs are about $40,000
Right, got that.
in 1 year, and that would, as Sean remembers when we were talking with Dale, that would give us all the drawings so that at a point of time for construction, we could then move forward. And it would also, if we did go forward, I think it included construction oversight. It's kind of a typical thing.
It's probably closer to 55,000 now.
Yeah.
Well, right, because, well, I can't remember what Dale's letter
Right,
said, I
right.
forwarded that in there, but it's usually 10% of the cost, and the cost was $545,000 with contingencies, so $54,000.
Okay. Probably closer to that. Okay, let's keep going.
All right, so that, from a slide perspective, that's all we had.
You know, the difficulty is the letter I got last night.
From Yates.
From Yates. And I have to set up meetings with the other funeral homes this week, well, next week,
No, go
to
ahead.
see what their intentions are.
Yeah, and this is what threw me earlier, because, and I'll just read right from the letter, it says, as we've discussed in the past, Kootenai County has denied the majority of our requests for compensation for our services to the homeless and needy poor. Now, that discussion I remember vividly, okay?
Right.
We continue to serve these families at our expense without reimbursement from the county, and the monthly payment for the coroner rotation does not begin to cover the cost of our employees, autos, and insurance. Go ahead.
Right.
So when they're on call,
Yes.
they generally have 2 people that come out to each call. Their contract with us states that they have to have 2 people on each call for us.
Okay?
That requires 24/7. I don't know if they have to have an extra person on for that contracted coroner month, but that means that there has to be 2 people extra available to them 24/7.
Okay.
And no matter if that's across the street or if that's out, you know, in the end of Kootenai County, which
Okay.
is wherever.
Okay.
That takes away from their staff being able to attend their services that they provide
Normally.
already normally daily.
Correct.
And or taking them away from their families, their plans, their programs, their everything else. And so the $1,500 a month is a great gesture, and Warren has gone above and beyond to accommodate their needs and their services. But again, with their increased costs for staff and transport and gas and all of those things, it probably doesn't cover them and their insurance that they have to bring these people out, either across the street or out in the woods or wherever they may be.
And even increasing, and I communicated to all of the funeral home directors that I had asked for an increase of another $1,000 for this year to bring them up to $2,500 a month reimbursement. And I communicated that to them, that it was gonna come through the budget, and yet Yates Funeral Home declined to continue their.
It's a very stressful month for funeral homes. It's a very stressful time. You know, we deal with it every day, so we're used to dealing with their families of indigents or difficulties of homeless people. You know, those are things that we deal with every day. But for added coroner month, that's a lot of stress for the funeral home with those extra phone calls, extra families. You know, we're in and out of their facility every day doing toxicologies or doing examinations. You got detectives walking around all day, you know, at different times. They accommodate us greatly whenever we call to go down there to those facilities and draw toxins or whatever we're doing. It's time consuming. It's a lot of effort for them to cut out of their day for us as well. So,
How many bodies would your lab hold?
It depends on the design. The rough out design that I have right now, it would hold 14, and then there would be another design room that could be independently cooled by itself, and where you could put racks, and then you could stack bodies.
that's terrible.
That's what it is.
But it is.
That's what you
That's
do.
exactly what we would do.
Yeah.
Yes.
They'd be on independent trays, they wouldn't be.
Right. We'll separate them out with this tray.
One person.
Okay. This is quite an education. Bill, any questions?
No.
I'm trying to put the, were you gonna show something else, Dina?
I'm just bringing up the actual
Yeah,
detailed
thank you.
numbers in case you wanted to look at any of the, you know, differences, increases, decreases, if you had any general questions. The overall, the budget's fairly flat except for the capital request.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple of items that we have here. One of them was, I guess it's, what is it, 10.5.001.3? Maybe it's not the same coding there, but anyway, it's your pathology and radiology.
8117, line 32.
8117, I'm sorry, yeah, probably the wrong one. Your 5-year average from 14 to 18 runs about 100, little over 106,000, with your highest year being about 140. Your 2020 request is 154.
Same as last year.
Same as last year, okay.
So it's.
Are you expected to hit that this year? The 154?
Hopefully not. You know, we're at 19 autopsies since
Yeah.
January.
Yes.
Yeah, and so.
And they run you how much per?
$3,000.
$3,000.
Once you get all of the
So
associated.
Just
fees.
under 60,000, 57,000. And we're
And that could flip
8 months
in one
into the
day.
year.
That,
You
that
mean with a
number-
mass fatality?
No,
Or just
as you
even a car
remember,
crash.
a couple, well, the first January that you were sworn in, that I came before the board and said I had a 300% increase.
2017, yeah.
Right, that was 3 car crashes with 2 victims in each car, plus our normal. So we had 12 deaths in October and November, and so we were 300% over what our average was.
Okay, all right.
And we're now into the 100 most deadly days of road travel. This is the second of the 100 most deadly days of the year for road travel.
June, July, and August?
Yep, busiest,
Well,
summer
yeah.
months, of course. And everybody's traveling for Memorial Day and the 4th of July and all of the other things.
And from the information that I pulled last night off of the budget performance, we're currently at $44,083 for pathology and radiology, which is our Spokane medical examiner. Last year, we were at $139,900. That's why I didn't lower it or change it. I left it the same. Because, again, Spokane doesn't do their numbers until September. And there's no guarantee that they won't change the numbers again.
The other item?
There is a call.
Go ahead.
My deputies don't get any income for being on call 24/7 for a week at a time. They get straight pay. The prosecuting attorney's office pays $250 a week for his attorneys to be on call, and they rarely get called out. Law enforcement gets on-call time, plus when they go out, they get time and a half. And so I think it's, to bring my office up to par with the rest of the county is appropriate. And that's why there's a $250 per week call pay for my deputies.
Okay.
And that's a loaded figure based on that.
I see the body coolers. Would the body coolers go into your new place at the Workforce Center?
Yes. What happens is that if it's built in, that's included in the architect's fee. So the autopsy tables, cabinets, bathrooms, all that kind of stuff would all be included. But the coolers that you bring in to utilize are extra, is what I'm told.
So you couldn't use the coolers now with your new, when you move into your new place, or could you? Not separate from the
At
lab?
the work release center.
Sure.
Yeah.
If I haven't.
Okay. So if we approved coolers but didn't approve the lab for this year, you would still utilize them?
Well, I would like to, but I've been promised that work pod for each of the last 3 years, and it has not occurred. So I'm going by past performance that it's not going to occur anytime soon. I would like to say absolutely it's going to be done, but you have to approve the construction money, and we'll be talking about that on debrief.
On Monday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah.
But absolutely, if I was in that work pod, it has a concrete floor, And there are electrical plug-ins, and it could be utilized as such. I'd have to check with the health department to make sure that, there doesn't have to be any separate air circulation with just deceased persons not doing autopsies.
Okay, let's go to line item 8199. I don't know if we hit on that yet, I don't think we did. Which is other professional services.
Correct, that's the funeral home reimbursement that we
Okay.
have. And so that's why that went up, the extra $1,000 a month, which is recorded there. And then because of toxicology and stuff, I increased it by 1%, that's the $370.
Okay.
So in the past, it doesn't appear that you've used all of that. So I'm just curious, if they're supposed to be getting paid a regular monthly thing, why would your cost be lower than your budget?
I'm not sure of the question.
Okay, so if you're budgeting,
49,370
Yes.
for that.
right, but in the past, you haven't ever used what you budgeted for.
And over the years, I've cut that down significantly. And also in there is the Hamel lab tests that the pathologists use, and I have no control over that. And I want to say it was 3 years ago, they increased their costs by 20%. And since I don't have control over the pathology and the ordering of the labs and I would not like to use Pamela at all,
Right.
because I just would prefer than using a national lab, but I don't have control. And
Okay, so
that's
that has both then, the regular funeral home,
That's the only
payment?
place I could get the funeral home payment in the budget, as well as using toxicology labs in there. Now, that also includes our NIMS lab, which is in Pennsylvania.
okay.
So then that might explain why, for example, your 5-year running average is at just a little over 11,000,
Right.
but your forecast is just over 49. I mean,
Well-
that's a fourfold.
Right, the original, you have to remember that when I was originally sworn in, the funeral homes got 0. And so then when we got them $1,000 a month, there was no place to take it out of other than professional services.
Okay.
That's also where we put the toxicology labs and the NIMS and because those are professional services.
Right.
Got it.
And so that's why that has to go up with the increased money for the funeral homes transportation.
Okay. Any other questions?
I guess I'm still missing something.
Go ahead.
So right now we deal with 3 funeral homes minus what you got yesterday, right? 3 funeral homes. So they each get $1,000 a month.
No, they get $1,500
$15.
a month
Okay.
Which
for
you want
12 months.
Right.
And I wanted to raise it
to 25.
$2,500 a month for 12 months. So there's only one payment each month.
Okay. So where is the $54,000 that is supposed to, if you do 1,500 times 3 times 12, right?
It should be 2,500 times 12. is
Because
the-
they only
It's
have
only
it for
when they're
them,
on
they only
call.
get
Right,
paid.
they're only on
one
call
day.
one month.
Oh.
It's rotating.
It's rotating, only
Rotates.
for the month that they're doing.
Right.
Okay, that makes better sense.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. I missed that. Do you
That
want to say
answers
that
my
again?
question. So, every month that they're on, so it'd be
Rotation.
1,500 a month, times 12 is
For last
what,
year.
is what we pay, so $18,000 is what we pay
Today.
today.
And you want to raise it, so it would be adding another
$2,500
12,000 a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this column represents your incremental increase.
Understood.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, Yeah, so it was 23,000 out of that line item last year, so that makes
Okay,
sense.
okay.
5,000 above and beyond what we paid the funeral homes. Okay? Okay, makes sense.
And that's a flat fee for however many trips they have to make. Okay, so once again, I have to come back to the letter from Yates.
Okay.
How does that roll into this? Or does it, to this discussion?
They will no longer accept a coroner's month on call.
So they will only take bodies who the families request that funeral home.
As
Correct.
opposed to servicing us?
They've basically cut the coroner's office out completely.
So they're out of the rotation.
But what's interesting, I get that, but the thing that's interesting in their letter is the reason they're giving is because of our not, presumably haven't come to an agreement with them as to how we handle the indigent cases.
That's a discussion I wasn't part of, so I wasn't in the room, so I don't know. All I have is the letter that they gave me, and they said they're not doing the call anymore.
So it's a combination, I think, of both the indigent problem and, so if the coroner used them and 100% of their people were not indigent, then they wouldn't be subject to that lower amount. They would be getting full payment. But if 50% are indigent, then they have to ask the indigent fund to cover those 50% of those calls that they responded to.
What would
Well,
happen if,
no, they get the $2,500 fee to respond.
Yes.
And no matter, and
Right.
whatever happens with the indigent
Is
I have no
separate.
control over it, I
Yeah.
have no payment over it, I have nothing to do with it, other than at 2 weeks, if it's an abandoned body, I sign the cremation order that it can be cremated.
And then we end up with their cremains in our office.
what would happen if the other two funeral homes followed Yates' lead?
That's exactly right.
That's the,
What would happen?
that's the worst case scenario
And-
that I haven't figured out. Right now, I would, without any talking to them and without talking to anybody else, I would say, I need coolers, a building to put the coolers in, I need 2 new employees, full-time, and I need a new vehicle. Employees are about $45,000 full-time loaded, so that's $90,000. A new vehicle to transport a body and a gurney is probably another 30 to 40. That we could take those 2 coolers, which would handle 6 bodies up there, and I think that was, what, 21,900 and some? So roughly $200,000 that we would need to spend in 30 days.
Okay, if we were, and this is highly hypothetical, if we were to approve the lab, what does that do to the work release center, to the plans to make the modifications that we're currently planning to make, or at least have had designs for the work release center? Does
That's
doing the
another,
pathology lab save any money with regard to work release, or are we talking 2 discrete situations?
I think we're talking 2 discrete situations. I would like to be able to incorporate what we're doing now into the lab portion, but my initial plans for the lab was to install a 2nd story above or even with the mezzanine. And so you would have the lab on the 1st floor, you would have a workstation, a conference room for meeting with people. On the upper floor, you would have offices, you'd have another conference room, you'd have separate bathrooms, you'd have expandable space for future deputies.
Okay. Any other thoughts? How many times have you requested the lab?
Well, every
Probably
year
well
for
before
5.
my time.
Every
I've
year.
been here for 5
Five.
years.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Bill, Leslie?
I feel
Go
like
ahead,
it's a great
please.
big project. I know it's a great big project. And I think that we're on a slippery slope, I think, of where we're gonna start putting bodies and how we're going to start treating our people in our community. And I think that's what it boils down to, is we need a place to put people. And we need to be sure that we're taking care of our people, and our people meaning our families, not only our deceased, but our families of our deceased. And those are the ones that we deal with, and those are the ones that are gonna be the face of the public. And if we can't treat their people right, it's gonna be disaster heading down the road.
But is Spokane really headed toward critical mass?
Absolutely.
I think so.
If you talk to the worker bees, the 2 pathologists would love to quit on the same day. There is no backup plan to hire another pathologist. And pathologists are the extreme of the doctor shortage. This is not your tissue pathologist like Dr. Datar in the hospital. This is a specifically forensically trained pathology for autopsies to discover wound channels, knife wounds, ligature marks, poisoning marks, the evil that people do to other people.
But the 50 per year that we perform, you're saying you would actually need the services of a, I'm gonna call it forensic pathologist to perform those 50.
Right, but as an example, Franklin Benton County in Washington contracts with a pathologist to do that, and they do about 50 to 55 a year.
Okay.
And they have a great working relationship with that physician. You have to put in the infrastructure before you can do anything else.
And we are very conservative with our autopsies. We do not send them if we don't have to. Because we've been trained well enough, and, you know, we've been provided the training to identify the ones that absolutely need it. And we have specific guidelines, car crashes and things like that, you know, murders, things like that go. But otherwise, we're very diligent about who goes where and what happens to them.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Nope.
Thoughts? You know, what's interesting in this whole discussion, and I think I've said it before, is that we learned recently that our property valuation has gone up, and I think the rough figure is about 1.8 billion year over year. So we're working off a wider base. So what we've been assuming as our maximum taxing authority at 3%, which we thought was going to be about 2.7 mil, between the new construction and the regular increase, is probably going to go up. But then again, so are the demands going with it. And I think if your lab is ever going to come to fruition, I think it's going to have to be addressed this year, because the economy is not going to keep roaring the way it is. And here, especially in this county, where people are having to spend multiples of their gross income for housing, I think we're approaching a precipice. I really do. And even people who watch the real estate market nationally have noted that about not just our area, but Boise as well. So, but then again, if we're going to do anything, I think this is going to be time to look at it. But obviously, we're not going to make any commitments here. So I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that. Okay. Public comment? 1:56, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.